Our next presenter is Sisi, and she'll be presenting online. So Sisi will take us through the governance aspects of the regional payments platform, and then after that we'll have a Q&A session. So over to you, Sisi.
A lot of attention to uh, uh, here in COMESA. And the other thing I'll just acknowledge is that, to no surprise, of course, any system sits in the context of sort of other market characteristics, right? We're designing a system, building a system, and that system needs to reflect the laws and regulations of the countries. It also needs to acknowledge the infrastructures and market characteristics of the country or countries that it's working in. And so we've really used this frame of thinking to make sure that all aspects of design have been considered thoroughly. Let me move to the next slide. And one of the ways that we make sure that this intersectionality of business decisions and technology decisions is captured properly is to write a robust rule set. Ultimately, a scheme rule set dictates how the technology is used to send and receive transactions, what's required of the technology. So rules, what's required of the participants who are connected to the system, what's required of other ecosystem players, what are our fees. Scheme rules have a really important role in the operations of a system. And so the CBC team has developed a very thorough rule set that's reflective of global best practices related to system design and goals of the COMESA regional platform to make sure that we're asking the technology to do things that make sense for it to do and that work within the context of our laws and regulations. So we have a robust rule set that is available to the group. And we also have participation agreements that have been drafted. And these agreements are what really sort of allows people to, excuse me, sign on the dotted line, if you will, to say, I, as an institution, as a part of the COMESA scheme, agree to these rules. And so the participation and other agreements really bind entities to the obligations that are described in the rules. So these important documents have been crafted for our rule set, or excuse me, for our scheme. We are constantly updating these to make sure that they are refined as we learn more, refined after we went through the proof of concept. And so these documents are hugely critical to our success, in my opinion. And just to dive a bit deeper into the rule set, I think the rule set at this point is, oh boy, I want to say a 60-page document. So by no means is it something I wanted to make us walk through today. But I did want to share just some hierarchical points around what it provides and how it's structured. So as I mentioned, it provides authoritative information to participants and other entities in our scheme about the scheme and how it functions. It defines the rules and obligations of the scheme. Importantly, it has I think, 3 to 5 page definitions. Excuse me, 3 to 5 pages of definitions, which sounds excessive. And I have found that component of a rule set is one of the most critical. So we've worked hard to make it clear what we're talking about anytime we use a particular word. This rules define the liabilities and responsibilities of each entity in the scheme. This is really important for anyone who wants to participate. Have we clearly articulated what we're expecting of them? It describes expectations around relationships between participants and their customers. And we sometimes even go as far to say expectations around what entities, the relationship between entities and their customers. So the payers and the payees. Ultimately, the goal of this regional platform is to help our MSMEs accept payment digitally in a low-cost way. And to do that, sometimes the rule set has to extend expectations beyond the participants and say, if you're a participant, here's what we need you to do for our payers, our senders and receivers. in order for this scheme to work well. And lastly, it provides the relevant information to support development and operational activities. And this comes to life in, a table of contents that articulates rules around these elements. We talk a lot about participation, what it means to be a participant, what our participant types are, what we ask of them, both for initial on an ongoing basis. We describe in detail the scheme services. These are core functions of the scheme, like clearing, settlement, fraud management, dispute management, and so on. We articulate the use cases and channels that we intend to support. We outline the value limits for a particular transaction. We describe exception management functions, country destinations and currencies, very importantly, fees and branding obligations. And I see I have eligibility here twice. And let me just replace one of those with governance, which I'll get to more. And then, of course, agreements, suspension, termination, and appeals clauses. So again, a lot of the detail around how things work, I think we are walking into today with a very strong rule set. Before I move on from the rule book, and dive a bit more deeply into governance, does anyone have questions around the rules and the scheme rules?
I think there's no question, Sisi. You can proceed.
Okay, great. So I mentioned the rule set describes governance. In fact, we have found that in many instances, governance sets the tone for a lot of schemes. This is an aspect of the scheme that many teams, and this is not a comment related to COMESA, just this is a comment related to my observation over the last decade, is many teams want to overlook governance. They say, let's focus on technical design. We'll deal with governance later. And the unfortunate reality is that governance is hugely important. And in many ways, it sets the tone. And so the CBC team has worked to define key governance roles for the COMESA scheme. And these roles have been defined very well, and we're working on building them out. And ultimately, these roles will be codified in the rule set. So the detail around how these things function, how these roles function, are acknowledged in the scheme rule set. And let me just share some of these key roles. You see oversight, scheme ownership, scheme management, rules writing capabilities, participation, operations, and settlement. These are core governance roles within any scheme. And let me just share with you how we've chosen to move those forward for the COMESA regional platform. So from an oversight perspective, there will be an oversight committee by the COMESA Committee of Central Bank Governors, already wonderful structure that you have in place, and take advantage of that capability from an oversight perspective. We want, from a scheme ownership perspective, there will be a special purpose vehicle created to help operate. The scheme management team also works with the owners and the participants to refine the rules. So we are starting out with a mature rule set, but over time, if you think about the regional platform, the vision is that this is operational 5, 10, 15, 20 years from now, and things will change, circumstances change. We need to be in a position where we can constantly evolve the rules and constantly evolve our scheme. And having a rules writing process allows us to do that. so that we can, stay up to speed, stay up to date. So there's an approach to make that come to life. And the participants, our next row, are a really important part of that. And these participants include national payment switches. So these are the domestic instant payment systems that exist in COMESA countries, as well as bank and non-bank. What we have here is DFSPs. These are digital financial services providers. I think this term has been introduced before. These are our entities that hold end user accounts and help customers send and receive payments. So all of these participants will have a role in rules writing moving forward and the functions of our SVP. Lastly, the operations, I sort of alluded to this in scheme management. Operations will be managed by a designated team, working in coordination with the management team, and of course, have with oversight from our Committee of Central Bank Governors. And all of these functions will be working with our settlement bank to the extent that it's required. And the settlement bank for our COMESA regional scheme is the Bank of Mauritius. And just from a visual perspective, this slide doesn't say anything net new from what I just described, but it sort of showcases the relationship between these entities, right? So we really see oversight having a really high level, very critical role that has oversight and visibility into all aspects of the scheme, working most closely with our scheme owners through that special purpose vehicle. That special purpose vehicle then has a very close relationship with, of course, our oversight body, and then is working on a day-to-day basis with our management team, which is our platform and scheme operator. And you can imagine, I sort of cut this diagram off in half. This sort of layered approach to oversight keeps going, right? So then our participants are underneath, working closely with our management team, and so on. So there's a hierarchical structure that allows almost a direct line of visibility from our central bank members through the Committee of Governors to our management team and our participants. And the rule set and our agreements and our laws and regulations in individual countries are really the thread that we use to make sure that we're all agreeing about the commitments and obligations that are expected of one another as we bring this system to life and as we keep it going. Are there any questions on governance that I can help answer? No questions. Okay, well, thank you so much for having me. I hope that the efficiencies and operational aspects that have been codified in scheme rules and the governance structure are well received. And please know that I'm available if any questions surface. Jonathan, please feel free to circulate my contact details. Such a pleasure to be here. I wish I could be in person, and apologize for not being on camera. It's actually pretty late here where I am in the States. And so I think it's best for everyone that I stay off video. Jonathan, if nothing else, thank you so much and have a wonderful rest of your day.
I really hope not to bore you much, and my presentation is very short, just 42 slides. As introduced, my name is Morgan Chishala. I'm with the Zambia Electronic Clearing House. It's a pleasure being here. I think most of what is making my days here are the bus rides. For those that are getting on the bus ride to Avani and from Avani, you're having a time of your moments. It's the best time ever. So thank you, Jonathan and team, for giving us the Avani bus. It's the best ever. I hope we could go with it back on the plane. I'm just waiting for the slide to be beamed. But basically, I can talk a as the slides are being prepared for us. So basically, the Zambia Electronic Clearing House runs the national financial switch. And, oh, there we go. Thank you. The Zambia Electronic Clearing House runs the national switch, and we're a separate entity that is owned by the central bank as well as the commercial banks that are in country. We were set up in the year 1999, and the mandate for the institution was basically to be an interbank clearing facility. By then, we had two critical services that we were offering, and that was the check clearing, as well as the direct debit and credit clearing. For those that were there in the banking days, this is where you have a bunch of checks collected and deposited around 4 p.m. and would run the checks physically. For those checks that were going up country, they would take about 11 days to clear. In country, or should I say within Lusaka or the processing centers, they'll take about 3 days to clear, and that's the background we're coming from. But now we have the check truncation system where clearing is T+1, meaning you deposit your checks this morning, by midday following day, your checks, your funds have already reflected in the accounts. In addition to that, like I indicated, we also run the national financial switch. This was an added service to the check truncation system, which we had been running from inception. And with the national switch, we currently have 3 streams, as I will detail in later presentations. But we've got the ATM switching, the POS switching, as well as the e-money or the mobile money switching. Participation on our switch is drawn from the commercial banks. We've got other PSPs, such as the non-bank financial institutions, and the MNOs, who are part of our participants, and oversight is through the Central Bank of Zambia. We also manage the scheme rules, meaning that we design these rules with the participants, of course. We sit them around the table like we are now, and we get the rules finalized and approved. And we also set up the industry standards. And looking at how we have demonstrated our capabilities as an institution, we are the preferred implementation partner for most of the industry projects. And these are projects that need all the participants within the industry to align to meet a given requirement, either through central bank or the needs as the industry notes. With regards to what we have managed to achieve from the time it was set up in 1999 to date, firstly, we have the one instant payment switch, and on this instant payment switch, we have all the participants I indicated earlier participating. And our instant payment switch, as indicated, is instant, meaning if I transact within a second or 2 seconds, that transaction should reflect on the other end with either a positive or a minus, meaning the transaction is either credited or I get a notification of a failed transaction. It's an interoperable local domestic switch, meaning that we only process domestic transactions for now. So to elaborate on what I mean by domestic transactions, on the card side, if an ATM or card is issued within Zambia and is acquired or presented for acquiring on a domestic platform or channel, that transaction is deemed domestic. The mobile transactions also, which are happening cross-network, Airtel to MTN, MTN to Zamtel, Zamtel to a commercial bank, are also domestic transactions. And these also pass through the switch. You will note that before we had this instant payment and the single switch or the single platform, we had a number of systems developed and deployed by the different PSPs, but they were not talking to each other. So the primary goal was to see how we would bring in interoperability and integration to allow for that seamless flow of transactions and communication between these systems, and that we achieved. I will give you a journey as I move on. We also have about 5 payment streams. I indicated the DDAC, which we now refer to as the EFT. We also have the check image clearing. That's on the two make the check truncation system, the ATM, POS, and e-money. With regards the participants that have been onboarded, apologies, it's showing 27 on my slide. I omitted 3. We're supposed to be 30. So we have 30 onboarded participants, and these are comprising of all the 18 commercial banks. We have non-bank financial institutions, about 9. We have all 3 telcos, Zamtel, Airtel, and MTN. And we still have about 12 participants who are in the process of being onboarded. They're just finalizing either the administrative or the technical integration. But come 2024, we see ourselves adding these 12 plus those that are still going through the process. Onboarding for us has become one of the services we note to be a weekly activity. We are always getting calls to say, how do we join the switch? What is it that is required of us, and so on. So the onboarding is not something that we take as a once-off, but we are taking it into our daily operations, and we've actually got processes for that because it's something that is a part of our daily bread as an institution. With regards transactions, I think yesterday we did see from CEO from UBA, the elaborate, and Bank of Zambia, elaborate transaction flows that were indicated. We've had over 200 plus million transactions just in the last year. And on the e-money, this is where everything is exciting. There's a bit of stagnation on the ATM and POS, but on the e-money, we are seeing an exponential growth, and we really don't know where this will end. But the journey so far is exciting because it's bringing in new opportunity for all the players, the banks, the MNOs, fintechs as well. And it's opening up room for a lot of innovation. So that is the space to watch within the country. We have a 24/7 support system, meaning that at the point of onboarding through your UAT up until you are deployed into production, and for all production issues, we've got at least 3 personnel that will attend to you at any time of the day. Our phones are never off, and this is why usually we have red eyes, so don't be shocked if you see me with red eyes as we walk along the streets. We have a team that considers our cybersecurity, and we have made effort, and we continue making effort to invest in this area because cybersecurity is something that is of importance. We are happy to say we have not yet recorded any incidents, but this is not something that makes us go to sleep. We continue to look at new softwares. We continue to see how best we can position ourselves, but we do have attempts to see how maybe people want to get in. So in line with our position on the cybersecurity, the institution has about 3 industry certifications. Firstly, we are PCI DSS compliant. For those that are not familiar with the term, PCI DSS is a payment card industry data security standard. And right now, we are working with the new version 4.0. We've been certified from about 2019, and we continue to be certified. We also have an ISO 27001, and this is mostly considering our assets and infrastructure as an institution, how we harden our infrastructure, how we deploy our infrastructure, the patch levels, the teams and the software teams that work on our infrastructure, and so on. We've also gone on to acquire an ISO 22301, and this is a business continuity management standard, meaning that as an institution, we are also cognizant of the fact that business must continue even after an incident, and we are putting in measures both at technical and people level, as well as process level, to ensure that our business continues in the event of any failure or anything that would have the potential to disrupt us. A bit of background to understand why or how we came about. Firstly, in the Bank of Zambia vision and strategy, within the year that I indicated, there were some modernizations that were called for. I think this was the 2017 vision and strategy, if I'm not mistaken. And part of that was to see how the payment system would be modernized. And like I indicated, we were set up as a non-profit making organization to serve the industry. So our organization is more service oriented, and this is why I indicated to say we become more like a preferred partner to perform some of these functions. Secondly, Bank of Zambia was also looking forward to promoting interoperability because of the different silos in the different institutions offering digital public infrastructure that were isolated to their networks. On the delivery side, our goal was to come up with a shared platform. This shared platform would bring on board MNOs, would bring on board non-bank financial institutions, would bring on board different PSPs. And when I say bringing on board, it's not just a technical integration, but also in seeing how we foster the payment system in the country, meaning would have to embrace a collaborative approach and not a competitive approach, would not compete on infrastructure, but maybe let's compete on the products and the services that we offer as payment system providers. Next, we also needed to bring up some standards to ensure that when the systems are set up, we always have my next door neighbor in mind. When I set up my system, let it be able to talk to my next door neighbor and my next door neighbor and my next door neighbor's next door neighbor. This is the standardization that assisted. There was also need to see how we bring in a multi-participant approach towards who comes on board. So initially, as with most jurisdictions, clearinghouses are owned by commercial banks, so they do not want every other player on their turf. But our approach was to see how we bring down these walls and enforce an attitude or a culture of multi-participation, which we have achieved. The end goal to this would be getting the unbanked banked, because now you are opening up channels for people that were not your customers initially to access your channels. This would bring in financial inclusion, and when financial inclusion is reached to a certain percent, you can consider your society to be more cash light. Cash continues to be king, and cash isn't something that we will take away today. In our journey to get the national switch set up, we decided to open up a tender within 2014, and a year later the contract was awarded. We run the FIS IST switch and the modules that support the FIS IST switch, which I will give a modular view on shortly. Our implementation took about 2 years plus, and this was mostly as a result of some of the challenges we began to encounter. You see, as a country, we were ambitious, but we didn't know what we were pulling ourselves into. We had never run a national switch before. A lot of dynamics presented themselves which we had not thought of before. And because we were doing most of the things ourselves with the support of some consultants, it was a bit of a challenge to firstly get all the participants to agree on how we move. Zambia has commercial banks that are owned by Zambians, but the majority are those that are coming in from outside. So you'll find that the agenda as well as the strategies would not always align. So getting all participants to agree to the timelines and to get things fixed was a bit of a challenge. But we eventually got around it with the support of the central bank, and grateful to that. Other challenges that we encountered were just to see how, now that you are bringing in different participants onto one platform, for the first time we needed to design interchange between an MNO and a commercial bank. Previously, these were done bilaterally. So an MNO would enter into an agreement with a commercial bank or with another MNO. But for the first time, everything was happening on one platform. And so all these dynamics were rather very new, not just to Zambians, but to all the other participants who are even coming in from outside Zambia, but within the region and outside. So with some technical consultations, and we are still making some of these changes, by the way. We haven't yet gotten it perfect, but we decided to start running. So we were limping as we were going, but now things began to get clearer. So you'd find us making few changes with regards to the rules, with regards to the commercials, the interchanges, and also with regards to some of the standards that we were setting up. Other challenges were to do with how the interface was set up.
Predominantly, ISO 8583 is a card-based interface, but we use the same standard for the mobile money. It has worked. However, the challenge is mobile money operators and other fintechs are more inclined to API integration and not the ISO 8583, which presents its own challenges. So getting them to get it right the first time has proved to be a major challenge. But suffices to say, moving forward, we are setting up a separate API connection for the mobile side of things. This is one to enforce a quicker onboarding, as well as to reduce the number of issues that come in post-implementation. Within 2018, September, we went live on the ATM. This was an exciting time for us. I think we had about 3 commercial banks and 1 or 2 MNOs on that day we went live. We didn't sleep. We didn't sleep because it was a joyous occasion for us. And yeah, you know, during pilots, it was interesting. Let me tell you a small story. I'll not take too much time. During the pilots, we would go to ATMs around 0102 because we wanted to trade safely. So you'd go and take your Zanaco card to a Stanbic ATM, register everything you note, get the receipt, and there are people back at the office that are monitoring, and they would call you to say, I see what you've done. Okay, that was around 0102. Coming to 0304, you're doing your reports, and you confirm that maybe out of 6 transactions, 1 failed, but at least it was because of an insufficient balance. You're happy. The following day, you try the same. So the day we went live, we wanted to really see if our pilots would materialize, and for sure, things went smoothly. And by the time we were reaching the 3rd or 4th day, we had raised from the 3 participants to the initial 16, 17 at the time. And then all the MNOs came on board and things began getting exciting. So this was a moment for us that was massive. And as I indicated, something that we never forget. So usually every year we celebrate up until Bank of Zambia comes in to tell us to stop those celebrations. So a year later, after 2018, we started with ATM because ATM was simpler. POS has what is called dual messaging, and it was a bit complicated, so we gave our participants another year. And by 2019, for sure, within October, we went live with the POS. Having gone live with the POS, our belief system was increased as an institution. And at the time, I think we were just about 18 members of staff. The numbers raised, and we're currently 34. But within 2019 and 2020, the following year, mobile switching was live. And this is when everything came to life on the switch. So since 2018, when we went live with the first transaction, we have never gone down. The system has been up and running. The only time we go down from one area is where we are doing our business continuity and run our processing from the disaster recovery site. And this is something that we perform on a quarterly basis. Within 2021, having noticed that we had run the project for a year and we noticed success after success, the project was closed, and we embarked on a journey to reposition ourselves from a very small institution with only the Bank of Zambia designation to start acquiring certification and to start subscribing to standards so that we can reposition ourselves. So this is where we got our ISO 27001 certificates. We got a number of other ISO certificates, but these are what apply to our infrastructure. And we also went on to get our 22301, our PCI DSS, and so on. And we have been running since, so the journey continues. I will soon show you what else we are doing as an institution. So for now, we're just running with the ATM, the POS, as well as the mobile money switching. Sorry. The national switch, high level. This is a modular view of what we have. So we've got our switch that sits at the core, And this is the online system that receives all those transactions that are acquired from the different delivery channels, POS, ATMs, mobile. There are 4 major modules that sit behind or in tandem with this system, and that's the fraud management solution, the MIS and recons, where our chargebacks, our reports are generated from. We've got the clearing and the billing also. And these, the clearing supports we use base 2 files for those that are familiar with them. And the billing just generates the settlement. It's more like our settlement module. And everything is happening under a transaction monitor, meaning that we are monitoring transactions as they go through. We are getting statistics, and we are ensuring that at the end of the day, our customer journeys give them the joy that they require. These are complex systems, I must say, and I'm not going to get into the technical side of things. I'm sure the technical teams appreciate what sits behind modules of this nature. Okay. Having given the modular overview, we could try to look at the use cases that we have. So on the left side, you will see the currently offered use cases. We have bank to wallet or account to wallet. We've got the bank to bank or account to account. I think the naming conventions differ from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. We perform cash in and cash out at agents. We also have wallet to wallet, wallet to bank, and you can perform a cash out from an ATM, meaning I can send you a mobile transaction which you can go and redeem at an ATM or at an agent. So these are use cases that we're actively trying to ensure that all participants align to see how best we can push more volumes on the system, but these are currently available and happening. So from your Zanaco wallet, for all the banks that are ready to receive a transaction from a wallet, you will notice that on the menu they will reflect, and the person can transfer money from their wallet into a bank account, or from their one wallet with this service provider onto another wallet with another service provider. In the near future, which is what is happening now, we are currently in the process of completing our tender process to get a standardized national QR code. Our merchants are acquiring QR codes. So what we want to do is to standardize a QR code to ensure that every scan that is performed on any merchant's QR code is channeled through the switch, as we have done with the ATM and the POS switching. We are also coming back to set up an agency banking solution. I think our Director Bank of Zambia yesterday did indicate that we want to break the silos that are now also existing on the agent side. We would want any agent to serve as any service provider. So I can walk into an Airtel agent and perform a transaction as though I'm doing it at my Zanaco agent without any issue. It should be seamless. And this is happening now because of the strength that our agency banking has kind of acquired. And we also just want to ensure that where commercial banks are not found, where people cannot really get a mobile service running because maybe the digital infrastructure is poor, they can still go to a shop where an agent is located and they can get some banking service or digital service performed from those places. We are also coming up with a centralized eKYC, and this is because of the importance we have noted with onboarding participants as well as getting members acquire new accounts with the different PSPs, the challenges that come in with presenting the same KYC documentation and doing the same things over and over again when they could be done with one referral point. This is also to back what is happening at national level where the digital ID is being discussed. So we will collaborate efforts with Smart Zambia to just see how best we can set up these systems and develop off each other's works around what is happening. A few statistics just to help us appreciate what is happening. On the ATM side, I think when we started, like I indicated, on our first year, we had about 404 transactions only, but we have noticed about a 14.4% over time, and these are statistics over the years. That is from when we went live to date. The POS has registered about a 64.4% growth. Not as much, but we're beginning to see a trend. You see, when you want to enforce digital services, you want to limit all those services that are digital leading into cash. So an ATM is a device that will bring back cash into your pocket, which is what we want to avoid. So if the growth on the ATM is not as much, it actually begins to give us an indication to say people are getting to appreciate digital financial services, and we might be moving on the right trajectory. And we're all doing something correct as participants on the system. So POS will not bring money into your pockets per se, but it will ensure that you're making payments and receiving services digitally. And this is something that is a bit of a plus for us in the country. If we consider the e-money, there's the percentage. For e-money, our first transaction for the year was about 356 transactions, which rose to about 12 million, and that has risen to 46 million. As of today, we've crossed the 60 million mark, and we are projecting to end the year with over 70 million transactions. So that 489.1% growth is something that we are all keeping our eyes on. Central bank, commercial banks, and that's where I'm saying the space is right now. So if there are any fintechs in here, that's the area that you need to focus your innovation around, to just see how we break away from bill utility payments as fintechs and begin to think outside the box of paying ZESCO, paying our water, paying for DSTV, and see what other innovations around this space, because this is where the gold is going to sit. And lastly, as an organization, you cannot exist in isolation. We've got a lot of integrations that we are undertaking. There's the Pan-African Payments Settlement System, PAPS. We are getting integration into PAPS. We are also currently members of SADC as well as COMESA, meaning that we have the banks have TCIB, transactions cleared, on immediate basis going on as a project right now. So whilst part of the team is attending this conference, there's another team back home that is looking into the integration on the TCIB platform. We are also here, meaning that the COMESA integration is something that we still consider important, because we still need to learn what is happening. We still need to see how we can break this silo we have created of domestic switching only and begin to embrace transactions that are cross-border. Zambians are always moving in and out, and it's important that even when our guests move in and out, we can still cater for those transactions at a fee that makes it comfortable for you to transact, and digitally, because that is the key word. So we are excited about regional integration, and we have demonstrated that through participation in various fora, as well as getting actual works commenced, like on the SADC side with BankServe TCIB. I think with that said, I will say Zikomo, and it's a Friday. Thank you so much.
Very much for that insightful presentation. That was very good indeed. Can we give him another round of applause, please? And also, thank you very much for putting on the CBC shirt. All right. Okay. So I think also just maybe to add on the presentation which Sisi was talking about on the governance. So just in terms of governance, I must also mention that we are working on the governance issues hand in hand with COMESA Clearing House, who are doing the reps. So actually, COMESA Clearing House also sits on our advisory board of this project. So we work hand in hand. We're working hand in hand with the COMESA Clearing House. And at this point in time, let me invite Mr. Leonard Chiromo from NatSwitch also to give his presentation. and then we'll take questions and answers. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Leonard Chilomo from the National Switch in Malawi. I'm privileged to have come with our father of the industry, the Reserve Bank of Malawi, which is in the room. Flowers to Director Fraser, Dwazika in absentia, Grenades, Nade, and my brother from the Central Bank. Flowers to you as well for the good support that you give us. Just to take you through, the National Switch was established in 2015 with the blessing of the RBM. Currently, we are integrated to all the 8 commercial banks that are in the industry. And we have 2 mobile money operators. We are privileged also to have TNM, which are one of the main mobile operators in Malawi. I see you, Chris, Moses. They are not only members of the National Switch, but also shareholders. And we're also privileged to have FDH, Trevor and Giuliano, who are also a commercial bank that is also a shareholder on the National Switch. Besides that, we have other key stakeholders that are part of the National Switch journey. We have our regulator, MACRA Communications. We have the FIA as well, which is working hand in hand with the Central Bank, doing a very good job. And we also have an aggregator for the MFIs, the microfinance institutions, as well as the SACCOs. That behind them, there are about 20 plus SACCOs and MFIs that are also integrated to the switch. And then we have other fintechs that are currently testing as well. Soon they will be joining the National Switch as well. So the ecosystem is growing. In 2015, we started with ATMs. We were only switching about 1,000 transactions. So you can imagine 1,000 transactions in February when we opened our doors. We could run our end of day process in about 10 minutes. We are done. And then the next 2 minutes, we have generated our settlement instructions file for settlement at the Central Bank. So the work was quite easy. Thank you. So currently on the National Switch, we are offering ATM transactions, point of sale. Then we have the wallet-to-wallet, interoperability between the mobile money operators. And then we also have the bank-to-wallet, wallet-to-bank, which initially were on bilateral basis. Then we have the account-to-account, which is the instant funds transfer. Then we have the card and PIN management system that we are offering to banks that are using the NatSwitch platform as their switch, as well as device management for the same hosted members. And we have dispute management and transaction reporting. And then we also offer training to our members and participants, of course, at a fee. Okay, so just to take you back, you can see how our journey has been. So in 2015, we went live on the point of sale, on the ATM transactions rather. Then the following year, we went live on the point of sale. So as my brother mentioned, it wasn't an easy journey. Achimwene from Zambia, Morgan, it was also quite a journey, especially when it came to the dual messaging. There were those, I can say, the necessary fights, but we pulled it through. And then come 2018, we also had to take another step further. When the MNOs came onto the switch, it was quite exciting to see, for the first time, interoperability between the two major rivals, Airtel Money and TNM Pamba. And then followed by the other integrations to the banks, wallet to bank and bank to wallet. And then we had the instant EFT as well, which went live in 2022, which has also changed the payments landscape. Initially, we had interbank transactions going through the central bank. So as you are aware, our father of the industry have their way of operating. But with their blessing, we put it through as well. And now we have an ecosystem that is thriving. And then not forgetting the MFIs through the MFI Technology Hub, which is an integrator of the SACCOs and MFIs. They are also live. They are able to push transactions to the MNOs. Soon they'll start pushing to the banks, but also they will be also rolling out a debit card, which will also promote the financial inclusion drive. Moving on. Like I mentioned, we have two categories of institutions, those that have their own switches and those that we are hosting on the National Switch platform. And we also have several fintechs that are planning to come on board onto the National Switch. Currently, the National Switch is operating a platform called Smart Vista, which was supplied by BPC. We share the same with our brothers in Ethiopia. I was just having a chat yesterday. They're also using the same platform. And one thing I would not forget to say is the NAT switch started with 2 members when it was in project mode. Just before we went live, we upgraded to 4 members. Currently, we are 7 members of staff, and I'm glad to mention my colleagues who are with me in the room today. The 2 Kennedys, Mr. Kennedy Chand, our IT manager, as well as our service management specialist, Mr. Kennedy Magaleta. Receive your flowers. And moving forward, our future plans are currently in collaboration with the Ministry of Finance, Malawi government, the Reserve Bank of Malawi, as well as our partners. We are implementing the National E-Payment Gateway, which will digitize government payments. So these payments are government-to-person payments, tax and non-tax revenue, and we have person-to-government payments as well. And it will also digitize the social disbursements, those that are paid out to, let's say, the pensioners, as well as relief funding, as well as e-commerce that will target the private sector. So it's quite a huge project. We expect, if all goes well, somewhere around the next year, we'll be going live. It will also transform the digital payments landscape in Malawi. And we are also looking beyond to cross the borders. We have cross-border remittances on our radar. Just as our colleagues here, we are working with TCIB as well on the SADC forum. And then we have the COMESA Digital Financial Inclusion Program that is also on our radar, and we are working closely with the CBC. And then we have other regional integrations that we are also looking at. And we have also embarked on a journey with the PCI DSS certification. And we are also trying to bring in the agent banking network. That's for the bank-led as well as the non-bank through a project that we call over the counter. So it's something that is at an advanced stage. Soon we'll be going live on the same. With that, I thank you all for your attention, and may you enjoy the day. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that presentation, Leonard. It's quite insightful as well. And can we also give him another big round of applause, please? Yeah, we're doing well on time, and without much ado, we'll go to the Q&A session. And the first question is online from Michael. So this question is for you, Morgan. So the question says, if all QR-based transactions go through the switch, does that include on-us payments?
Yes, it does. Thanks very much, Morgan.
Thank you. I turned back into the room. If you've got a question or a comment that you would like to pose to the two presenters from Zekiel and NetSwitch, you can raise your hand. Yes, John.
Thank you, both of you, for the wonderful presentations and for being with us. Mine is based on our platform that we intend to implement. I heard, Leonard, that there is a fee, like onboarding fee for the participants in the switching. So for us, we looked at like reducing the cost of the transaction, of which I think might be attributed to the cost of whenever they want to actually change the cost of the user, it will be the part and parcel of that cost will come from the onboarding fee. So I don't know whether you are able to tell us like the figure, or is it a negotiated fee per participant? So that I think our focus is we want to bring in new players like the DFSPs who are normally not on the platform, and maybe in some other quarters, it's like the fee that the national switches do charge. Somehow it's a bit on the higher side. So I wanted to know if there are challenges that you have ever encountered in terms of like onboarding them, and if you are free to tell us like how much does it cost for one to be on a national switch? Because I heard Leonard mentioning of the fee. I don't know if that is okay. I just want to appreciate it. Thank you.
All right, thank you for that, John. So, yeah, currently there's a fee that any aspiring participant to integrate to the national switch, they have to pay. Of course, it's something that is quite debatable. It's a discussion that is ongoing because there are other players who deem that the fee is on the higher side. I will not disclose the amount, but since discussions are still ongoing at the industry level. But yeah, there's a fee. Thank you.
Maybe just adding on to that. These fees are unavoidable. A service has to be provided. There are a lot of license fees that have to be paid. We don't develop our own solutions. Even if we developed our own solutions, the people developing them need to get a certain amount. And I think people that are coming on board are aware to say there was initial or forward capex by those institutions that were there at a time. And it's only fair that as you come to the party, I consider it a commitment fee to show that I'm committed to the cause and this is my contribution. So what they get from there is the bigger part, and that's the beauty about getting yourselves hooked into a platform such as a national switch.
Yes, Tirotima.
I would like to comment on this matter. At the Bank of Mauritius, what we have done is to work out a cost recovery fee over a period of 5 years. So participants don't have to pay an onboarding fee but we have a routing fee per transaction. And this is scattered over a period of 5 years, so that it doesn't come as a financial burden on any of participants who wish to go forward on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Does that answer your question, John?
Yeah, it pretty much does. Thank you.
All right. Yes, Babla.
Thank you very much for the presentations. My comments and questions go to Ezekiel. The figures that you shared, very impressive growth-wise. And my interest is to know how, whether you are intentionally disaggregating the numbers so that we can appreciate how much women are taking up the technology. What I have witnessed in Malawi is you go to an ATM, you find a woman who is asking a security guard at the ATM to help with doing the transactions. So that's a worry in terms of security of those transactions. So I would really be interested to know that uptake, and also in terms of security in that regard. What have you done? What are your experiences? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. It's interesting now that for everything we're doing, we need to see the gender line, and it's critical for us. To respond to you directly, as an institution, in our collection of the information that we are processing, one of the things we are doing within 2024 is acquiring an analytics tool. And what we are hoping to achieve with the analytics tool is to begin to see some of the trends, as you're referring to. How many of these transactions, for instance, are performed through channels that are registered to women? And that is also, I think, a drive that is happening within the industry. And I think through central bank assistance, as well as what most of the participants are doing, we are beginning to see most of the PSPs begin to show focus, or should I say to divert energies to ensure that all the information they are making a submission on is giving that gender aspect to it. So it's something that we haven't been doing, but it is something we're working towards seeing, because this is a discussion that is alive, and it speaks to how much we are making inroads to the female potentials who sometimes are marginalized, because a man who has the wallet in his pocket is seen to have the power. And if the woman is to get anything, it is what the man decides to give to. But where we begin to see, like you're indicating at ATMs, our female going to transact freely, it gives us an opening as to the digital inclusion on the gender side of things. With regards security, as a switch, there's really not much we can do but continue to speak to our participants to kind of carry out additional sensitization with regards to security at the delivery channel. The same happens at the agents. We would want to see how, want to see people coming up with the required security awareness. And through the Bankers Association of Zambia, the Payments Association of Zambia, and Bank of Zambia programs, especially on the weekly what are those financial awareness programs. These are some of the topics that are discussed. So we still see one or two people, due to illiteracy, requesting for assistance at channels, but programs are in place for sensitization and just to see how this can be brought to the lowest it can. I don't think it can really stop, but brought down to the lowest that it can. So I think in my response, this is some of the measures that the Zambian industry has taken on the sensitization part. Thank you.
Jonathan, if you allow me to also speak to the question. As Bank of Zambia, we are already collecting the gender disaggregated data in terms of access. We developed a framework in 2018, 2019 that we're using to collect this data already. So when it comes to access or account ownership, we have clear visibility in terms of mobile wallets and also bank accounts on how much women or the male are using or having access to financial services. And we've got this data down to the district. So we have visibility in each particular district and province of how the gender is divided. And this causes us to also target our efforts towards the areas that we find that the gaps are quite big. You can see even between the mobile payments or the mobile money and also the bank accounts, the gaps are pretty different. With mobile money, the gap is narrower. Aka, I think, in the room is the person that even prepares the reports for our management for us to be able to see what is happening. The guys at the back there analyze this information. So you can see that the gender gap maybe in terms of account ownership on mobile money is like 5.something%. When you go to bank accounts, it's actually in the double digits. I think it's well over 30%. So then you begin to design your policies around that on how you can. So we are moving to the stage where we now want to look at usage. We are getting some data of usage, but the national switch is one of the key infrastructures that we can use to actually be able to see, even if these women have access, how much are they using these products? Thank you.
Thank you, Director. Any other question or comments? Yes.
Yeah, thank you. My question goes to, is it Monkan? You did mention that some of the mobile money transactions can actually be redeemed at the ATM. So I just wanted to appreciate whether the charges that would accrue on that particular transaction are the same that would also accrue at an agent level. If the same transaction was to be cashed out at an agent, are the charges the same as those that would apply at an ATM?
Thank you. So within our space, we've got different tiers of charges for the different use cases. On the POS side, there's a set that is set for acquirer, issuer, and so on. And then secondly, we haven't fixed a transaction fee or a charge for the participants to levy for the transactions. We have left that to them. So you would find that in some spaces, there's a bit of a difference. It's not really a significant difference in instances. And so the fee doesn't really apply the same. We initially wanted to see how we can technically integrate these systems. And the commercial side of things is what is happening. And Bank of Zambia has actually stepped in now to see how they can look at each use case and they're applying commercials so that they can begin to sanitize what is happening within the market. So for customers that do not have an ATM but have an agent, unfortunately, the fee that is set by the service provider is what they go for. But there's usually a range within which they set some of these fees. So you might not find that they won't be the same for each PSP, either on the ATM or on the agent. But this is what I indicated to say Bank of Zambia has begun to sanitize so that the experience of the customer remains one. I should understand to say if I go to an agent to do a cash out or if I choose to do a cash out on any ATM, I should either pay 5 or 7 kwacha maximum. That's just as an example. So this is the exercise that we are currently in. Unless my director from Bank of Zambia would want to come in. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. So initially when we started with this use case, what happened was that the banks were concerned about the charges on the ATM, because what was happening was if you went to draw from the ATM using your bank card, the charge was lower than what you would pay if you went to cash out at an agent. Because the mobile money agents, the mobile money service providers make their money from just the transactions. The banks could afford to charge a lower fee. So the concern that was coming from the banks was that once we opened up the ATMs, the 4 million plus at that time, people would rush to the ATMs because the charge at the ATM would be lower for them, because you could now draw from your wallet using the ATM. So we sat together with the various stakeholders, the banks themselves, Zekio and ourselves, and we decided that The switch should be able to distinguish. It was already able to distinguish that this is a bank to bank. This is an offers bank transaction. So it continues to charge the fees that it normally would charge. When it comes to an ATM, the switch should be able to identify, to a wallet, it should be able to identify that this is a wallet transaction. And the fee that was allowed for that particular transaction was identical to what you would pay if you went to an agent. That way, it would make no difference for you to want to crowd the ATM because you were charged the same fee that you were charged at the agent at the ATM. That's what we did. So that avoided the rush towards the ATMs. Thank you.
Thank you. Grenard, does that answer your question? Grenard, does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Because to some extent, it's a matter of balancing. As the director has mentioned, if the charges on the ATM are lower, then definitely people flock to the ATM and not the agent. And yet we would still want to have the agent. And their only source of revenue is through the cash out and the commission they get through cash out transactions. So that's the situation that we're having as well in Malawi. Like my neighbor had introduced the debit card, but it didn't have the same effect that we expected, like in terms of the take-up. The uptake was a bit lower because the charges that would accrue on the ATM are basically the same that would accrue on an agent. And yet, maybe somebody would have to travel to access an ATM, while the agents are within our locality. So, yeah.
Thank you, Grenard. Nee, and then we'll go at the back there. So, Nee, you can start.
Thank you. Thank you, Morgan, Leonard, for a wonderful presentation. It was very impressive. My question is around your plans for ISO 20022 migration and the challenges that you anticipate and also the preparations that you are making. And it's for both Morgan and Leonard, if you can share with us the plans. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll take that one at the back there, and then Dr. Wesley Piri. So we'll start at the back there, then Dr. Wesley Piri.
Thank you. My question is to Morgan. So you mentioned about the QR code initiative, and I'm just trying to appreciate what is the value proposition for the QR code versus the current existing mobile money payments, and who are your target group, especially that QR code is very dependent on smartphones, and we know that the smartphone penetration at the moment is quite low. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Piri.
Thank you, Jonathan. I think I just want to say one or two things from the Malawi side. For me, not as a system integrator, but I think as a user of some of the systems that we're using there. My thinking when you're looking at the financial inclusion and the coming in of the national switch, you would think it's supposed to reduce some of the costs that we're looking at. I'm looking at the cost issue that one of the members here talked about. I think you've talked about the cost in terms of the withdrawals from the ATMs and all that. But there is another cost in terms of the interconnectivity between the banks and the MNOs. So I'm looking at, as an example, most of the guys that we have, we're running some projects from Spark Systems, and the projects, most of the people that we're dealing in some of the projects, they don't even have bank accounts. So you find if I'm to say I withdraw money and give to this guy, it will charge me from around side it's about 240 kwacha. But this person has got a phone number where I can send through either BAM or Airtel Money. For an example, to send from a bank to that number, it will charge me about 3,000 kwacha. So you look at the difference from 240 kwacha to 3,000 kwacha. An easy option would be, hey man, go on the ATM and cash this money and go and give it. So when you're talking about financial inclusion, I think can we look at interoperability of these systems versus the charges? I would look at it the way you're talking about the national switch, you connected these guys in. Why it is that it's still way high? Well, this is over 1,000% to move money from a bank to Airtel money or even taking Pamba from Malawi side. I haven't done the same from Zambia side. Okay, I've done, but I haven't seen the actual charges in terms of the numbers. I think that's one thing that I would just want to understand in terms of the regulators, if we've got Reserve Bank here, as well as the guys from the National Switch. Thank you.
Thank you. So you can take those 3 questions. Anyone is free to start.
Okay, to respond to Ni's question, we are live to the ISO 20022 rollout, and as an institution, we have already started the journey. We have 2 critical systems, like I indicated, the check truncation and the national switch. Our vendors are reviewing the standards and the specifications on the ISO 20022. And we've set out our rollout, which first begins with them appreciating and getting back to us. So we're getting into phase 2. They've done the initial reviews and they've brought them back to us. So we're just trying to consider what they have given to us in line with the mapping that needs to be done. And then following on from this, we will set out a clear roadmap as to when we begin the testing and all. But this is already something that is in action from our end. I don't know if you wanted to respond to this.
Sure. So we are also working toward adopting ISO 20022. It's a project that has been initiated by our central bank. So yeah, we are quite making progress on that, because we do understand that most of these regional integrations will require ISO 20022 format. So we are in the right direction. Thank you.
Okay. To respond to the QR codes, we have noted that a number of merchants in the country have begun acquiring transactions through QR codes. For those that are living in Zambia, you notice when you get into Book World now, they also have a QR code on the counter, meaning that they've begun to offer a service that, if brought onto the national platform, can increase the acceptance levels, as well as see how best we can have even that channel covered and factored in what we want to bring in. So we are mopping up those participants that have already taken the initiative. We also have commercial banks that have begun setting out QR codes and setting out apps to acquire on the QR code. So we do not want to wait until another silo is created or more silos are created, and we believe it's time to capture even that set of transactions that are being acquired on the QR code. So I'm sure even you as a PSP will soon get fintechs that would want to get that done. So at the point of your getting onboarding on the QR code, we would want to ensure that we already have set a standardized national QR code, and that those transactions will feed into the NFS. In addition to that, when we notice most of what is happening within the region, you know, technology is imported. So people understand to say, in other jurisdictions, this is what is happening. And we are setting ourselves up in preparation for the upsurge in transactions on the QR code, which may be slow for now, or which may be or localized internally by the different PSPs. But this is something that will break out, and at the time it does, we want to ensure that we are ready as a national switch, and that even that set of transactions will be mopped into the ecosystem, and we can have visibility on what is happening on that space as well. And then lastly, I think with regards to the charges, I think I did indicate to say when we started the journey as National Switch Zambia, we wanted to see the technical interoperability, which we have achieved. Commercials are not something that you can realize overnight because of the investments that go into some of these issues and matters. But suffices to say that we are on a journey to ensure that what we offer as a fee at the end of the day becomes something that a user can be happy about. As a national switch, for instance, we only charge 16 ngwe for a transaction. Now that 16 ngwe is a very low amount, but we just want to promote the culture to say, if we can be low on value and encourage high participation, which will bring in high volumes, we should be able to get our cut back. And we expect that participants will also extend that affordability to the customers at the end of the day. So like I indicated, this is a journey that we have embarked on with the support of the central bank. And I must say in this country, the regulation has been very supportive, and it has given us that environment for growth, even in the area. So we are yet to get a distinction on our commercials with regards the customer journey, but suffices to say we have started the journey.
Thank you, Morgan. Any other questions, additional comments? Yes, Tirotima.
Thank you. Firstly, I have a question both to Morgan and Leonard. Do you have open banking in your roadmap such that a user doesn't necessarily need to have an account with the app provider? So you can have an app and then register any account with any other service provider. And once that account is registered, he can use his app for doing any transaction. Firstly. And secondly, Leonard, I'd like to understand a bit more on the centralized CKYC project you mentioned. And then I'd like to share my experience afterwards on what we are doing in Mauritius regarding centralized KYC. Thank you.
Thank you. So maybe Leonard, you can start on the centralized KYC and then open banking, and then we'll go to Morgan.
All right. Thank you. So for the open banking, we conceptualized the idea, but then we have not yet drawn a roadmap, but it's something that we are considering. I think thanks for bringing that up. It's something that we are really considering. Of course, there are other participants in our industry that have already embarked on that journey of open banking. Now, on the centralized eKYC, currently there's a project that is being led by the Reserve Bank of Malawi to implement a centralized eKYC database that will serve the industry needs. And I'm sure, Grenard, would you shed more light on the progress of that project?
Actually, progress has stalled because I think other stakeholders came in with their own models. So we're like failing to move. We had the assistance from UNCDF, who brought on board a consultant to do a diagnostic and perhaps come up with a proposed model. So the model that was proposed and was preferred by the industry wasn't adopted by the other stakeholders within the industry. These would be the government entities, especially the National Registration Bureau, because we thought it would be a separate entity hosting the platform, but the NRB came in and they wanted to host it, and the industry was not happy with that approach. So that's where we are now. We are not making any progress. Thank you.
I think from our end, open banking hasn't really gone out that far, where, for instance, you find even APIs being published for fintechs to easily integrate and innovate around. And then you also understand that you need some certain fundamentals in place for you to access, to actually achieve proper open banking, one of which could be ensuring that you can have a digital identity for anyone that is participating on the digital financial service space, either on the demand or supply. And this is one of the projects that I indicated to say we've got our government through the Smart Zambia that is trying to see how we can come up with some digital ID for anyone that qualifies. And I believe this is something that will see us do more within that space. So not much, I believe, is happening within the space. And with regards, the second question was to do... with the centralized KYC. Yes, so in Zambia right now, you'll find that if I need to open 3 different accounts with 3 different PSPs, each one of them will ask me for maybe my proof of residence, a bill payment, or something that clearly defines who I am. Our NRC is used as the primary document. Some use even the passport number. So every time I need to get this service done, and there are those overheads that come on, and it's becoming something of an inconvenience. And then secondly, we have a number of issues that arise with the submitted documentation. So what we want to do is to ensure we have a bureau or a central location where we can be pulling such information for any participant that wants to use that information, either to onboard a participant or to carry out different verifications. So the idea is when we have this pool of information as regards who is in which commercial bank, under the Data Protection Act, definitely, the service is offered to improve on how people get themselves onboarded to the different services, as well as how much we understand who it is that we are bringing on board, because of sometimes the systemic risks that arise, or the other risks that arise with bringing in such. So for us, as a switch, we will engage all the participants, quasi-government, the payment system suppliers, service providers, just to create a central database within which any institution that would like to carry out a verification service can then acquire that service through us. We haven't gone into the details with regards the whole framework and how it will be set up, but the primary goal is to ensure that we do not have the customer, one, present the same information every time, which is updated differently depending on when they approach a PSP, and 2, we have a secure and a mechanized form of ensuring that people who participate on the digital financial service line can clearly be identified, and that their records could be verified as being people that are eligible to take part. So that is the general idea around the KYC.
Based on what you have described, does it mean that you are going to maintain a database and the information will be fed by different participants? For example, I go to bank A, I'm going to open an account, so I'm going to provide my KYC documents, and will that bank feed the information in the central database?
Yes, so there are 2 things. Firstly, like now, we've got different institutions that have different databases already set up. It could be an issue of integration. I integrate into this and I can do more like a lookup to just confirm that. Secondly, for financial services, we can then say what information can we pull from the already existing databases to feed a financial need. That is the point we can then say the central database that we run is specifically for the payments ecosystem, because then that is what is relevant to us. So this is where I'm saying we've got RATSA with their own database with maybe biometrics. We've got NIMA with their own database and biometrics. We then say, what information can we then pull from you institutions into a common place to help facilitate the need for a payment financial service for anyone that is out there, either as a provider or the customer at it. So the final details of that implementation are something that we are yet to sit with the industry to agree on how the implementation and the scope of implementation will go around. But at the end of the day, for us, our concern is for those participants that would want to perform some payment within the DFS, and we see how that centralized database. Something that we are yet to sit with the industry to agree on how the implementation and the scope of implementation will go around. But at the end of the day, for us, our concern is for those participants that would want to perform some payment within the DFS, and we see how that centralized database becomes of help.
Thank you. So I'd like to just share how we have gone about it.
Okay.
We started with a project to have a centralized system that would be owned and operated by the Bank of Mauritius. So at the inception, we started, just thinking that, for example, as I mentioned earlier, I go to Bank A, I provide my KYC, so that bank will send copy of my KYC documents to a central database, and tomorrow I go to Bank B. Bank B will just consult the central database to see whether that information is already available. Then we realized that with time, the management of such a central database would be very complicated. Because, for example, for proof of address, you always need to have a recent proof of address. So when I go to that second institution, it will have to see whether my proof of address is updated or not. And then, if not, ask me to provide a proof of address. So then we realized that it's going to defeat the whole purpose of having that model of a centralized system. And also, the government in the meantime had come up with a sort of provision that was meant for government purposes only, where it was providing a channel for pulling information from the source database. Then we applied for, we submitted a request to the government, and this required legal amendments so that the central bank can give access to its participants to a channel that it is putting in place to these different databases. So tomorrow, if I need to open an account in a bank, I just go, and that institution will submit a request through the channel set up by the Bank of Mauritius to pool information regarding KYC from the different databases that the government has. Because otherwise it would have been a replication of what already exists at the level of government, at the level of the central bank. So now what we are doing is just implementing that channel to interlink participants to the databases held by the government. And this is going to be a much more simplified way to go about KYC. Thank you. So this is what I wanted to share.
So maybe, thank you very much. Maybe I'll add on to what Morgan said. So for us in Zambia, we also noted that the government is putting in place a system that is going to generate a digital ID. Works have progressed, and the central bank did actually submit its specifications of what we want to be able to tap into, so that we can easily just connect to this system and pull the data, just as highlighted here. So we have been working with the Ministry of Home Affairs and Internal Security. We have identified about 3 to 4 banks and the 3 MNOs that will begin to pilot and will begin to pull this information from that system, so that at least we have that data. So what we have done is, what kind of data will we be able to get from this particular system? Is it enough for what we want to see? In some cases, it's not, because we'll be able to pull, I think, about 5 or 4 sets of data from the government system. And this will be able to just simply be the basic KYC for yourself as an individual. But the bank goes beyond that, or the service providers go beyond that. They are servicing companies. They are servicing MSMEs. So where do we get this data from? We need that data, especially for the MSMEs. You know, sometimes they don't keep, the transactional data is so critical for a financial institution to either decide to extend credit or not. So that is where now the system at Ezekiel comes in. So we don't want to replicate the data that we can get from government, but we do note the need to have this extra data that can help companies and especially MSMEs. This links directly to open banking, and I like that the questions are coming together. Open banking is simply the sharing of transactional data. It could be at the level of the KYC data, but even the transactional data. An MSME is banking with one bank for years and years. Then they go to another bank or another service provider and they need some form of service. They shouldn't be put at a disadvantage because their information with that other institution cannot be shared with the other. So that is where now Zekia will come in to sit, because there's always the issue of who hosts this data. And most of the times, if you put it with a competitor, it's a no-no. So Zekiel is not a competitor, it's a utility company, and it sits at the heart, it's owned by the banks, it's owned by the central bank. So we decided that this could be the institution where we could put that. But before we can embark on what gets shared, we needed to make sure that we had the infrastructure. The need was there. We have banks already that have said that the need is there. And what we have started this year is a feasibility study. You know, when you adopt some of these things, you need to understand your environment. It's not that every solution will sit well in your environment. So we've started a feasibility study with a partner that will look at how Zambia is right now. What is the infrastructure there? Where are the gaps for open banking? So that we can have a proper roadmap on where we can begin when it comes to open banking. The service providers also have to be carried along. What type of information initially do they want to share? So that feasibility study will cover all that, and by the end of December, I think, or early next year, we should have clear visibility on where we stand, where the gaps are for open banking, so that we can come up with a roadmap on how we proceed on that. The question on the commercials, sorry, Jonathan, we can have a bilateral after that, but it's a very complex situation. You can build the technology, you can interoperate, but when it comes to the commercials, it may even keep the participants away. And it also depends on your ecosystem. You can't adopt something just like that for your system. So for the Bank of Zambia, we drilled down into analyzing our own environment. We went as far as calling even other central banks. Look, you've got a switch. Can you help us with this? And they tell us we don't have that scenario where somebody can go and deposit at a fintech agent. And you're sitting there. You refer to Visa, you refer to MasterCard. It's only at the level of maybe switching of cards. So we had to sit down and pull all that data. We had the long nights as well, where we looked at the bilateral agreements. You need to strike a balance where you ensure that the service provider still continues to make their margins. They need that. And also looking at the other aspect of this infrastructure should bring down costs. So it's a delicate balance that depends on your own country. So you need to deep dive into what your country is doing and what it looks like. Thank you.
Yes, I fully agree with you that we should develop whatever we are doing, taking into consideration the local context. And it is very important to have all stakeholders throughout the whole journey, so that we come up with a solution that takes into consideration the interest of each stakeholder. And we also have collaborations at the level of central banks. We talk to each other, we share our experience, we have platforms where we do that. And we have been working with Zambia, also Zambia and Malawi, sharing information on various aspects, especially regarding digital financial services, which is something very new to us. So we have been sharing information. And with regard to information on corporates and SMEs, we have the database of the registrar of companies. So we have been consulting the different organizations that are involved in the setting up of legal structures and so on. And we have seen what is the data that is required by the service providers and what data is available at the level of these organizations. Then we carried out a sort of matching between the two, And we have been sort of being the middleware between these two parties. And this has helped a lot. But you need to do lots of work with your stakeholders.
Thank you very much. Indeed.
Just comment on, just to add on a layer onto this in terms of the UBO, and one of the elements that we looked at is UBO, when it comes to money laundering. UBO, for those unaware, ultimate beneficiary ownership. When you start looking at who owns a company, that's where a company is a way of hiding financial crime very easily. The UK has historically claimed it's got great records with Companies House, but there's been a large number of scenarios recently where they've had to bring in proper controls around that Companies House registration. If you want to launder money, go to the UK. That's not the official line, and hopefully that will now stop with the new KYC process they're introducing. But the reason I raised that is that we looked at a lot of the data registry, and it was part of the merchant registration process that we're building within the platform. We looked at that Companies House registration, and there's open companies, and we tried to see how much of that information we could put into that merchant registry database to make life easier for the monitoring side. So if you're still exploring potential avenues there, there's definitely work that's been started within the Mojaloop space that you might not be aware of, but might be interested in. I also wanted to comment about, there's a number of projects the Gates Foundation funded. The other is MOSIP, which is providing digital identities. So again, if you're not looking at that as a potential solution, it's another open source product, which means you can host and run and operate it and control it in your own way. So another project, if you're not aware, I'm not that involved with MOSIP, but we can provide access to the relevant parties if that's of interest to anybody. So, but merchant registry, building that Companies House database, because we do need to understand the risks of that as we start building the MSME product, because companies are where you can hide most of the financial crime.
I've done my PG camp.
Thank you. We okay to start? Everyone ready? Brilliant. Hi there, everyone. I'm Rob Reeve. You probably saw me yesterday, but probably worth explaining that my background is telco and banking. So I was the COO of a challenger bank, as well as doing mobile money in about 30 countries. So I'm the person who's done mobile money everywhere but M-Pesa. So I've got experience in countries that didn't like me, regulators that didn't want me to launch. But I've had the opportunity to experience every single spectrum of the payments ecosystem, from wallets to bank accounts to POS to running VisaNet in Peru. All of these projects have meant that I've been able to pick up a lot of experience on different payment schemes and the different challenges. So LexTago has been supporting Thixawork and been helping the CBC guys more on the operational and the compliance side. But those of you who get involved with compliance will understand you need to understand what's going on in the core payments infrastructure for you to be able to add proper guidance, which is why I'm quite happy to stand here and talk about the rest of the technology, but that's not my area of focus. So we'll get into that in a little bit. So, on with the slides. So LexTago, we exist basically to help people with real-time payments, but looking more at the compliance. And this clicker's not working. Okay, we can have, now we are, okay. So we're going to start with financial crime. There's been a lot of conversations. As I briefly mentioned a few moments ago, the Gates Foundation have funded a number of projects. One of those is on transaction monitoring. And therefore, detecting and monitoring financial crime is one of the platforms the Gates Foundation has provided. But we need to be very careful of expectations of what a central switch can, and I've lost the mic. We need to go to this one, back again. We need to be very careful on what the central switch can and can't do. It can take data from other parties, but we were just discussing eKYC, and I'm going to give a good example of an eKYC problem. It's very easy to onboard an individual using biometrics and provide them an account. Unless you are doing continuous due diligence, which can only be done by the bank that's operating that account, you do not know whether that account is still held by the person who onboarded. In one of the countries we operated, 300,000 biometrically registered accounts were moved from the villages, where we found out later the person applying was given $5 for them to hand over the account. That account was then moved into a SIM farm. If you don't know what SIM farms are, happy to explain later. But that meant 300,000 digital accounts were all being operated by criminals. So eKYC is just a step in your journey. Continuous due diligence by the DFSPs is equally important. So we're going to start talking about where the financial crime will sit. But it's worth noting that the platform that we've been helping evaluate, or at least look at for CBC, is open source and was built to be implemented in DFSPs, the banks, the mobile money operators, or in the switch. Its primarily focus at the moment is on the switch. But I've actually implemented this with a cryptocurrency company, and I've also implemented it with a small savings company. So it is adaptable enough to provide a number of different services. So the financial crime portion is this part of the architecture. For those of you who will have access to the roadmap, it's hiding in there, and then we'll come on to dispute and case management in a short while. A couple of things to note. It's built as TM as a service, transaction monitoring as a service. It runs off ISO 222. Again, it's API driven. We use the ISO 222 format, so we can receive those transactions natively into the platform, analyze them. It's rules-based. We have this conversation regularly when people say, oh, it's rules-based. Thanks, that's old technology. Welcome to the world of smart rules. And dig underneath an AI, and you'll find two key components: the neural network and the inference engine. The inference engine is what makes the AI go down a new path based on changes in data. However, that also introduces the bias. So we built the neural network with rules. Now, a rule, everyone thinks I've reached a certain limit. A rule could also be, what is the transaction profile of this individual, and does this latest transaction match that profile? That is a rule. That is what an AI does with machine learning. So we've built the platform to cope with rules in that manner. We built it to basically run at speed as well. So within Mojaloop, there are 4 events that create a transaction. So Mojaloop requires 4 events for us to evaluate a transaction is good or bad. That's actually running at 2,000 transactions per second, or 8,000 events per second, being assessed in under 50 milliseconds. So the platform has been built to run at scale. And as I said, it's open source. That means you can add your own rules, you can add your own customization, you can take the source code, do what you wish with it. It's been built to allow you all to provide controls in a way that drives down the cost. We know that platforms of a similar nature normally start at $1 million. The Gates Foundation have done that heavy investment, so you don't need to. And part of the goals that we want to move towards is that you can configure and add new events over time. That's the phases that we're in now. These are the current data points that we take from ISO 222. For those of you involved in financial crime, you'll know that a transaction, even though it's data rich, ISO 222 does not provide all the information. A lot of information sits at the DFSP. So simple things like, how long did it take this individual to log in? Is this a machine or a robot that's logging in at this time? That will never hit the ISO transaction. Whether someone logged in, changed a password, and then did the transaction, that will never hit the switch. So those controls exist and need to stay at the DFSPs so you can manage and control that. Just going to quickly work you through how the neural network works. So we take the information, as we said, the FSP sitting with the starting point. We then store that data. So you can run that into your own case management. We're expecting you as DFSPs to still run your own case management service. We will then pass that through to the payment switch. The switch will then put that through an adapter. This is where we have to convert from modular loop into ISO 20022. And this is where we start the process within the monitoring software. We start with the transaction monitoring assessment. So this is the inbound API where the ISO 222 data is assessed. We can go through processes of pseudonymization so that data within the switch is not PII, data sensitive, personally identifiable information. We'll get to data privacy in a moment. There are a number of conflicts that modern financial services have to balance. One of them is data protection and transaction monitoring. We then do some data preparation. Sometimes the data we have still isn't sufficient. We might need to overlay additional data that we've already captured from previous events. And it's at this point we save that to say we have now our starting point for the assessment. The assessment then goes through to the next part, which is the routing. An event does not need to be assessed by every rule. A rule can be used to identify different types of financial crime. So we're trying to optimize the use of the platform by saying we'll look at something many times in different ways, but we'll only look at it once in a specific way and then reuse that result in the next stage where we move into the typology assessment. So the rule comes in. As I said before, the rule can be anything like how old is the account, 30, 60, 90 days. Why? Risk assessment. We can then make an informed decision. This is a young account. Should it really be doing this volume of transactions? Problem with this, we are going to create false positives until we calibrate the platform, which is where later on we need a feedback loop from the DFSPs because we're going to be saying, this looks suspicious, what do you think? And you tell us, no, it wasn't, and we can then start calibrating and harmonizing the platform. These are the challenges of new switch systems, that until you have enough data on an individual, you will get false assumptions. The platform then assesses and works out a typology. Once a typology has been identified, such as a phishing scam, or this is a suspicious transaction, or this person's name has been identified against a sanctions list, all of those typologies can create an immediate alert to the case management system. We need to build the case management system for CBC, and we need to build it in such a way that it allows for data sharing cross-border. So there's some complexities that we need to work through as part of this implementation. But all of that build is aimed to be open source. So once it's done, any of you who want to look at this can look at it for your own personal uses and potentially adopt it within your financial institutions as well. Once we've done the rule, we then send that through to case management, as I mentioned, and we store it. That is then sent through with backwards and forwards for the data, because the other portion we're building is that we're building on an open source data warehouse. So sitting underneath this, we have a very large data warehouse because we're getting lots of information. We still need to work through the boundaries and the lines of where data privacy and data consent and a legitimate interest for transaction monitoring all cross each other. There's an intersection of data that we need to go through. Once we've identified something, though, that information will be sent back to a DFSP. So if we see somebody who's on a watch list, the challenge we have is all we will have is the information in ISO 20022. Name, address, date of birth. Problem, name. The challenge with terrorist financing and certain names, I'm going to use the name Mohammed because it has the most complex requirements. There are 30 variants of Mohammed. An individual will register themselves with their proper name, but the agent that onboards them has a different spelling for the name Mohammed, so they put that down on the paperwork. Suddenly you've got a disconnect between who you're looking at and who you're dealing with. So when it comes to sanction screening at the center, there is possibly not enough data. And therefore, this process of identifying and doing sanction screenings, we can see using mathematical models, we can say this is a Mohammed. There's one of 30, we'll just call it Mohammed, and we can then assess that against the list. But that means we will have false positives and they will be fed back out. And the system will then take your feedback and make sure that that transaction doesn't trigger the same sanctions list, or if that sanctions list updates to include that name, we can basically build a rule that says the list has been updated, that person is now on the list, you need to be aware. Apologies for the expression, you're aware of the expression belt and braces. It's an old English expression because it's used for people who had a pair of trousers, you had a belt to hold your trousers up, and then you had braces. In other words, if your belt failed, your braces worked. If your braces worked, your belt worked. Failed, your belt. So you had this redundancy built in. We are just providing redundancy to your DFSP sanction screening. Because we're building this in, if you haven't got that, then you can leverage the platform in your own environments. And that way we can stop the number of false positives arriving at the center, and you can start doing the addressing for your own to start with. Okay, that's enough of the platform and what we're doing, but this is giving you a sense of some of the things we need to work through. So we moved through the working groups. These challenges and the things we need to balance will form parts of those discussions. The next action that we need to look at is dispute management. Before we get into that, so this is the section here, the bottom, dispute and case management. This is where we're starting to identify problems. So we were asking questions yesterday, what do we do if things go wrong? It's worth identifying complaints versus disputes between a fraudulent dispute. There are 3 different levels. A complaint may lead to a dispute. A dispute may be a fraudulent dispute. So as a category, Glenbrook did some great work, and there is a paper on best practices in instant payment schemes, which we can share to everybody if you're interested, just let me know. But those definitions and how other instant payment schemes are using dispute resolution have formed the basis of what we've been assessing as part of our work with CBC. So, a couple of things that from the scheme rulebook that we need to start looking at. Dispute management. What is the mechanism? How quickly, how long should we take? What a customer does not want to have is 3 weeks later, they still don't know whether their disputed payment is going to be refunded. That will just lead to distrust. So the SLAs will be pushed back, unfortunately, to the DFSPs to make sure that there is a mechanism for you to respond and get the information you need to make an informed decision. We need to build a platform for that. That's part of what's going to be built as part of the case management, dispute management. It's a combined proposal to put the 2 things together. There needs to be, within the platform, liability rules. As we were discussing yesterday on the e-commerce, who pays for a fraudulent transaction? And if there's not clarity of that when somebody's onboarded, you're going to have problems from merchants and consumers at some point in the future when you move to time-distanced transactions. I pay for goods now, the goods arrived in a certain period of time. That separation between real-time transaction and that payment of goods is going to create some new risks. We need to have high-level general procedures. We propose a number. And there needs to be information sharing, as we've already mentioned. As part of that, you also need to have complaint handling channels. So what channels can you have? Web page, agents, SMS, WhatsApp, any number of different communication channels all being used for a customer to introduce the data. As you mentioned earlier, the transaction comes with the quote. That quote and that transaction, when it's terminated, comes with all the information that a customer would need to say, this was my transaction. And that way we can provide that transaction and make sure that you can create a link through to that transaction for the switch so all the parties involved can be quickly identified and the communication can start. There needs to be timelines and monitoring. There needs to be a guideline on how long can a DFSP, with respect to everybody, everyone gets busy at some times. That means there becomes queues and delays in their services. And that means a DFSP might be taking some time, which means then we need to work out how do we create a realistic SLA for delivery. We then go above that. At some point, the communication between the 2 DFSPs will reach its limit. The recommendation at this point is to create an appellate body, an ombudsman, that sits across the region and acts as the escalation point when things don't go wrong, don't go right. And of course, regular reporting and dashboards to make sure that everybody knows how they're doing and if they're keeping on top and what problems are starting to appear and what things we can do to improve. Keeping going, we then need an escalation protocol, feedback mechanisms, training and awareness. Customers need to know that they have a right to complain and to get resolution if things aren't fixed. Be aware this can lead to abuse by some customers. It just comes with the territory that you give customers options. Sometimes some people will abuse that because they'll just shout and say, I want my money back. That does not mean they necessarily should. The process should be fair and unbiased. We come into a lot more detail of that later. We should also look for continuous improvement, and this is the part, again, from the working groups. CBC can come up with some ideas. We can give them guidance and ideas, but we need the feedback from everybody, DFSPs, regulators, as part of the working groups to look at how we deliver this effectively. And of course, the customer, again, needs to know about this as part of the awareness. So I've covered all the complicated part. I'm now going to the final part. The same way as CC. CC created a nice 60-page scheme rulebook. We've annoyed Jonathan and Joseph and John by sending them a 100-page document of recommendations and approaches and guidelines on what to do as they're standing up. We've been using the word CDRP, platform. Sorry, we're building a service. That means there are people, there are roles, there are things to do, because you're building something more than just a technology platform. You're building something that will serve customers and will provide access to these financial services. So as part of that, sorry, I'll go back. We went and did a deep dive of what licenses might be required. There's now a questionnaire going amongst the central banks for us to start getting feedback on what license is required. We can assume we sit under the existing mandates. We want to validate that. We want to assume about what regulation says. We want to validate our interpretations to make sure we're not misinterpreting. Of course, we've just mentioned fraud prevention and detection, but we need fund settlement and clearing, as well as operational resilience. All the things that go into the great work that both Morgan and Ledden presented. They built a business. They've built something that is running and operating. The same needs to happen here. So that whole process for the operational controls is what we've been documenting and articulating. You can see we went through absolutely everything. Our approach has been very simple. Take best practice. Take the most stringent regulation, start there, and then see how we can deliver. One of the challenges with most startups is that they come in with no knowledge of what the real regulations are, but they're small enough that they can get away with skirting around. Those people who've had the unfortunate position of trying to launch a financial service when you're part of a large organization, you realize that the regulatory oversight is going to be on you immediately. So for CBC, because it is representing COMESA, there'll be a lot more people looking for this to fail and looking for reasons to make complaints about it. So its standard that it needs to start with needs to be high. And that standard includes worrying about things like Kenya and its data protection regulation. So Kenya, for example, has data subject rights. If you've not looked at GDPR and one of your customers is going to interact with somebody in Kenya, you need to start making yourself aware of these sorts of things as part of this process. Because that legislation, if you have a European Union citizen, GDPR applies to you. You may not have enough transactions to really worry about it, but you should start being aware this is coming and start preparing your systems for those things. So we did that, covered a specific deep dive on the implications of data privacy, the controls around that. We then did, even Godfrey, who's sat in front of me, so I'm whistling through this quickly so we can get to questions, because I think more is needed on questions and answers than me reading the slides. Godfrey did the deep dive on the security side and the controls and everything that's needed to move us beyond. Finally, so as I say, we had the deep dive on the cyber security. These are the things we went through, as well as the planning for cyber resilience. So we've done a deep dive of the document. So the 100-page document, it covers the security and the cyber resilience as well. Once that's finalized, that will be shared for the working groups as basically the starting straw man of what is really required to deliver the CBC service. I've got a load more supporting information. I've shared a couple of these slides with Chile earlier on. From that perspective, we've got a couple of things like SAFOs that people aren't aware of. As I mentioned, one of the challenges that's starting to surface is data privacy and detecting financial crime. For detection of financial crime to work well, we need a lot of data. Yet data minimization is a requirement of Data Protection Act. Balancing and those contradictions is one of the things that we need to work through to make sure that we have the right data in the right hands. Legitimate interest of all financial regulators allows for a lot of data to be captured, but that data can't be then used for other purposes. So Understanding those controls means that within some environments, where legislation allows, a specified anti-fraud organisation might be better suited to run and operate this. I've put more details on this within the slides, but that was my presentation. I just want to move more to Q&A so people have some time, because I know there were lots of questions yesterday, and I said we'll pick them up today. So that's me done on presentations. I'll open the floor to Q&A. Any questions? We have one in the back.
Yeah, thank you, Rob. I think you may take a seat so that maybe we see if there are some questions following your wonderful presentation. So do we have any questions? I see a hand from the Bank of Zambia. I think we can start with you, Mr.
Thank you for the elaborate presentation, Rob. I wanted to find out from the entire presentation that you've done, operational resilience of NFMI is critical in any setup.
So can you move, I'm struggling to hear you, can you move closer to the mic, or can we get a roving mic to you?
Am I audible now?
Yeah,
I think
perfect.
So, yeah. I was talking about operational resilience of any FMI.
Yeah.
From the presentation that you've done, I haven't seen anything that refers to, in the event that there was an operational issue on the IPS, what failover arrangements have been put in place by the FMI to ensure that there's business continuity? Thank you.
Yeah, so as we've built a proof of concept at this stage, we haven't gone into the deep dive, but one of the things that we have put in place inside of the operational assessment is we need to start looking at the risks, both the physical and the cyber risks that are being exposed to this platform. So as part of that, the assessment of hosting and standard operational separation of distance, that they are safely and securely separated, that is part of the assessment. But that's going to be delivered as part of the next stage of the delivery. We've just made sure the requirements are clearly articulated. So from that perspective, we've made sure that disaster recovery and business continuity are both covered as part of the things that need to be done before allowing a go live. So for the go live, yes, they will be there, and the designs need to factor those. The platform itself can and has been tested to be resilient from that perspective, so we can build the environment without challenges, so we know it can do that, but for the project, that's the next phase of delivery. We've just provided the requirements to make sure that that is assessed.
Does that answer your question? Okay, fine. Do we have any more comments, interventions, questions from the audience? Do we?
I think we've answered all the questions. That's a bit of a scary place to be.
It looks like we don't have any more questions. So may we, yeah, Morgan.
Yeah, so one of the challenges a regulator has is that AI starts introducing biases. We're all human, we all make judgment calls. I've had an AI that's basically become biased against Italians because, well, my team were Italian and they didn't trust their own countrymen. So the AI picked up on that and we started booting Italian customers off our system. Well, that's not a healthy place to be, that's a bias. The problem with an inference engine is that it takes a rule and creates its own feedback loop that creates the divergence that you don't want. That doesn't mean you shouldn't be using new data points and identifying data points that will help improve. So the optimization and calibration of the inference engine sits away from the decisioning and becomes a feedback loop. That part's yet to be built. But the neural network, which is where all the data points are being captured, that part is built. So we can build rules, new rule types, have them as part of our data stack, but the tweaking that rule has to come through a feedback mechanism that a human being decides that it's going to approve that change. That way the system doesn't go off on its own bias and the human controls it. So it can make a recommendation, but it will not implement that recommendation. AIs normally go with the inference engine and implement that recommendation under its own volition, creating some of the challenges that we have. Does that make sense?
Any more interventions from the floor? I see none. Thank you, Rob.
Thank you.
Maybe we may give him another huge round of applause. Thank you. At this moment, we are now getting to a close of our program, but there is one more session. So I ask Dr. Jonathan Penifolo to take us through the working groups, the introductions, what's there and what needs to be done and the way forward. Because I think some of you who were with us during our previous meeting that we mentioned about the working groups, which are at the moment 3. We have the legal and regulatory, then we have commercial, we have the technical and standards. So Dr. Jonathan Penifolo will pick it up from there. He'll guide us on what needs to be done, what is in each of the mentioned groups, and how do we chart the way forward regarding the work group. Thank you. Jonathan.
Thank you, John. So in terms of the working groups, we'll be in Q1, we'll be starting the 3 working groups. So we have the technical and standards working group, and the second one will be on the legal and regulatory framework, as well as the other one will be on the commercial working group. So essentially, what's going to happen is we are targeting to have the platform live by next year. We are looking at August 2024. But between now and August 2024, there are so many things, probably, as you have noted from the presentation, that maybe we need to refine issues on pricing, joining fees, and others and the like. But also even what needs to be charged, like the cost of transactions to the end users themselves. So these working groups will now focus on the actual nitty-gritties. So what will happen is we'll soon be issuing out an RFP by this December. And then once the equipment like integration is in place, we'll also on the other side in parallel be discussing on these issues. So like for instance, the commercial group, as I've said, will look at pricing issues, how to onboard participants just to make sure that all people are there. And then the technical and standards will look at technical issues, the ISO 222 standards, and the others. Then we'll have the legal and regulatory working group, also just to focus on compliance with our regulators. So we've already started sending out invitation letters, but we'll also continue sending out. So you'll receive invitation letters. But in the event that probably you've got specific work groups that you want to be affiliated to, please provide such details to us in which specific working groups you are. But essentially, this will start in Q1. We're looking at probably towards the end of January or the beginning of February. That's when we'll start the discussions in those specific working groups. So essentially, I think that's that on the working groups, and I hand over back to John.
Thank you, Jonathan, for that overview regarding the work group. So I think we're all clear and we're moving forward with regards to the tasks coming ahead of us. It's really going to be so hectic because we need now to refine our working ethics and maybe the standards and the legal and regulatory group, considering the compliance with the recent presentation which has been made by Rob. Maybe I'm pretty bit biased because I'm interested in that, but I think that's most of our working group which we need to actually consider much, because before we take off, we need to shake hands properly with the greater authorities. So when we develop the rules, we need to bounce them back with the central banks, so that I think we align, and the ICT regulatory authorities. So coming to this point, we would like to have to hear closing remarks from Mrs. Trotte Magobenchori from the Bank of Mauritius. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Dear colleagues, I'm permitting myself to skip all the protocol addresses. We have been working collectively together over the past 2 days, so I believe we can skip the protocol address. We have had very fruitful exchanges during the different sessions that we have had. So as we draw the curtains on this transformative proof of concept workshop for the COMESA Digital Retail Payments Platform, I wish to extend my deepest gratitude for your unwavering commitment, insightful and valuable contributions, and collaborative spirit throughout the deliberations. The journey we've embarked upon, dissecting the intricacies of digital financial inclusion for micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, holds profound significance for our collective pursuit of progress. Your engagement in exploring the facets of this initiative, from regulatory considerations to the technical intricacies, exemplifies the dedication we share in fostering financial inclusivity and economic empowerment across the COMESA region. This workshop has been a crucible of ideas, a forum where expertise converges to shape the future of our regional financial landscape. Colleagues, as we part ways, let the echoes of our discussions resonate beyond these virtual walls. Let the insights gained and collaborative endeavors undertaken here today propel us towards a future marked by inclusive financial systems, flourishing MSMEs, and seamless regional trade integration, which is the ultimate objective of this initiative. I extend my heartfelt appreciation to each one of you for your dedication, expertise, and unwavering commitment to this noble cause. Together, as architects of change, we are laying the foundation for a more inclusive and connected financial landscape. Thank you, and let our shared vision for a digitally empowered future continue to guide our actions. And I wish safe travels on your onward journey. Until we convene again, let the spirit of collaboration endure. So it's been a pleasure, a real pleasure for me being amongst you. And I wish you all the best. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Trotema. I would like to request Dr. Jonathan Peniforo, who is the Chief Operating Officer for the CBC DeFi program, to come forward to actually guide us on the recommendations which have been gathered during these conversations that I've been having for the past 2 days, including today, and also to advise us on how do we really conclude on behalf of our CEO, Mr. Teddy Subramanian. Over to you, Dr. Jonathan Peniforo.
Yeah, thank you, John, once again. And thank you all for your active participation. So I'm standing here on behalf of the CEO for COMESA Business Council, Mr. Ted Subramanian, as well as the COMESA Secretariat and CBC Board Directors. So essentially, we've come to the end of the second POC meeting here at Livingstone, which now concludes our work on the POC, I think, which we've done for about 2 months now. And special thanks to our system implementer at ThisaWorks in collaboration with Restego. As I pointed out earlier, I want to say going forward, we'll be putting up a few RFPs in December in preparation for the full-scale implementation. So essentially, as guiding recommendations for this meeting, we're saying that the meeting took note of the progress of the POC results of the DFI scheme between Malawi and Zambia, of course, based on the presentations which have been done. But also at the same time, the meeting considered the technical specifications. I think there were issues like, for instance, on creating settlement, forex management, fraud management, and others. So in terms of the meeting recommendations, we've got two recommendations. Number one, the meeting recommends the extension of full-scale implementation to the following 8 pilot countries, which also have been there like previously in the initial business case. We have Malawi, Zambia, Mauritius, Kenya, Rwanda, Uganda, Ethiopia, and Egypt. And then the second recommendation, we are recommending that probably the results of this must be presented to the reps, technical user groups for further endorsement and transmission to the COMESA Committee of Central Bank Governors. So ladies and gentlemen, those are the two recommendations for the meeting. And I propose for a proposer, any proposer? Yes, madam.
Thank you very much. I recommend that you should extend to other countries so that as we do business, especially for women, it will be easier for us to make the payments to the countries we normally do business with, especially in the COMESA region and the countries which we trade with. Thank you.
Thank you. Any seconder? Yes.
I second, because I think it also help us to widen up our net, not only focusing on 2 countries, but making sure that we're focusing on many countries to see how this is going to help us in our COMESA region. Thanks.
Thank you. So that concludes our recommendations. And going forward, as I've said, in Q1, we will now, I think, go straight into the working groups. And in closing, on behalf of the CPCCO, I would like to thank you for your active participation for the past 2 days. It's been quite insightful, but also we've learned a lot of things. I think there have been a lot of questions, but also your guidance. We'll take that into account so much so that we move forward with this program so that the MSMEs can also be assisted, as also you are aware that these MSMEs are a major contributor to GDP in the COMESA region. Going to the announcements, we've prepared buses, 2 buses for those who are willing to go to the falls. So after lunch, the buses will drop you in your respective hotels, and then they'll wait for you. Then you leave, go to the falls. But for this one, we're not paying for the falls, so for those, you pay for yourselves. we are just providing the transport, but it's not that much. Maybe only for my colleagues from Malawi, but I know for my colleagues from Zambia, I think they're entitled to not to pay anything. Yeah, so, but you pay for yourselves. We're just providing the transport. So you'll be there between 2 and 5 p.m. So from the hotels, that is, you start, maybe you change your clothes. You'll be there for 2 to 5 p.m. for the falls. And that's the first announcement. Secondly, also for those who still who haven't received their DSAs, please make sure you receive your DSA before you leave, because we also normally have challenges when we haven't paid when we are back in the office, and you're also aware that we are also going towards the closure of the Christmas to process. So as long as you are here, please make sure that you get your DSAs and make sure that everything has been sorted out, whether there are fuel refunds for your cars, or maybe you had maybe refunds for your air tickets. Let's make sure that we have cleared everything. We'll be around just to make sure that everything has been cleared. Otherwise, thank you very much and have a safe trip back home. And also, I wish you a Merry Christmas and Happy New Year. Or hope to meet you next year. Thank you.
Oh yeah, one last more announcement. Lunch, we will still provide lunch today. So yeah, same time, same place. Thank you.
you.